Um, but basically, let's start off with what it is. Um, Google Forms really are, I don't know if you guys are Star Trek fans, it's data. It's really a way to collect data. And the data is largely set by you guys. So you get to decide the kind of data you're collecting, um, and then people tell you what you're asking, right? It's a survey. You can collect contact information. I use Google Forms for contact forms. So anytime you see a website where they have a contact page, and instead of getting a direct email, you get a form you fill out. Google Forms can be a great tool to use for a contact form. Really simple to put together. Getting feedback. I use these to get feedback from all my workshops. So you'll get one of these Google Forms in your email after we finish up here, and I'll be asking you for your feedback about this. So, you know, the uses are numerous. You can use Google Forms for a lot of things, but you do want to start off with kind of what is your intention of this particular form before you really start building it. But ultimately, it's a data collection tool. Oh, and we'll talk about this thing. I told you about replacing doodle polls. It can also be used as a scheduling tool. There's an add-on that we will have to use for that, but essentially you can set it up so that Google Forms will eliminate a choice every time somebody selects it. So if you want to send a form to people and you've got a bunch of slots that are available for appointments, let's say, for example, advising appointments, um, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or whatever it may be, you can set all those up as choices. And then with this particular add-on, those choices get eliminated as people select them, so it can be used as this kind of scheduling tool. So it's a really, it's a neat thing, and there's ways to use this that you might not have thought of, but we'll kind of get into more of that when we talk about add-ons. So again, we've sort of gone over this a little bit, why it might be great, because it is all the things we talked about earlier, but easy, free. It's not just easy for the people that make it, it is easy for the people that use it. Do you guys see the election poll that the Clarion sent out? That was a Google form. A really nice looking survey they put out, and it was pretty simple to take. The data you can download. So I know you guys might be concerned about, well, can I get this in an Excel sheet? Yep, you can definitely get it in an Excel sheet. You can also get it in a Google Sheet. So you've got all the functionality there. The graphs are kind of automatically generated for you. That's a nice thing about SurveyMonkey that we kind of missed originally with Google Forms before, maybe a year or two ago. Google Forms didn't do that. And Google is kind of notorious for starting with something in its infancy and just putting it out there, and then they kind of let it grow from there. And that's what's happened with Forms. It really has kind of come into a full-fledged survey tool like SurveyMonkey is now, where you've got these automatically generated graphs, and they look nice, and you can use them. Again, mobile responsive, iPad, iPhone, Android, whatever, it's going to work on all those devices. And another great thing, so if you're using it as a contact form, you might want to embed it in a web page. I'm going to do another workshop on embedding in a little bit, so we'll talk more about how to actually do that, but just know that these forms can be embedded. So you've got a web page, you can take the form and put it right inside of a web page. So it will maintain the look and feel of your website if you're trying to maintain your branding, or if you've got other information on the page you want to provide or make sure there's access to while they're taking the form. There may be a number of reasons you would want to do that, but Google Forms does make it easy to embed these forms, which is cool. And another great thing are these multi-part surveys. So what that means is if I've got choices for that alumni survey, for example, that is a multi-part form. We have sections where the survey they're putting together for alumni asks them if they did certain things. Did you complete an internship? If yes, it will skip them to a specific section. If no, it takes them to another section with different choices. So you can kind of lead people through a survey based on their selections using that multi-part function. That's a pretty cool piece of functionality, and that didn't exist too long ago either. That's sort of a new thing for them. But that was another one of those things I think SurveyMonkey had for a while that Google Forms didn't, but now Google Forms is right there with them, and it's pretty straightforward to put that together. So, getting started. Springtime, right? There's our little start. We can access it from Drive just like any other of these Google applications. So if you're in your Google Drive, you can access any of the forms you put together right there. You can create a new form directly from Drive. Or the other alternative is you can go directly to forms.google.com and access it straight there. And you've got all of your forms and you've got templates that you can use to create your form from forms.google.com. The other nice thing, specific for me, because I send these out a lot, every workshop I do, I send out another feedback form. I copy them. I don't create a brand new one every time. I can copy an existing form, change the title of it, and send it again. And now I've got a different data set to work with, so all my data isn't all mixed up together. Each time I do that, I've got, my separate pieces of feedback from each workshop that I can identify. So that makes it kind of nice too. Any questions about getting started so far or about forms?
Could you do like a course evaluation this way?
You could. You definitely
And so
could.
the question my students would ask if I did that is, would it be anonymous or would I know?
We're going to talk about that. You can make these anonymous, or you can make them required to sign in. And when they're required to sign in, obviously, you're going to be collecting their email address. One of the ways I kind of like to make an in-between, sort of the optional version of that, is you don't require them to sign in, but you put an optional question at the top for them to input their name or email. So if they want to provide you with their personal information, they can. It's not required at that point. So you're not making them sign in, but you're saying, hey, if you want to give me your name and information, you can. So let's talk about some tips. I talked about this a little bit earlier. You really want to think about what you're collecting before you even get started. And then you work backwards from there. So think about your goals, and then you'd be surprised how many times you realize that there's extra questions you need to ask based on the information you're trying to collect. So that's really the best way for me, at least, to go about this is, what do I want to know? I want to know about perceptions, or I want to know, demographic information. So if you're collecting this information for a specific purpose, maybe you need to actually take it and enter it into some other database. Start with that database that it's going into, and then make sure all of the information you're asking for is exactly what they're asking for in that database, and make sure it's formatted the same way and whatnot. So always start at the end and work backwards. That's really the best way to go do that. Question types, are really going to be dependent upon, again, the type of data you're looking for. So a good example of this is an email address or something to that effect. Google Forms has this cool little thing where you can actually have something called data validation. I think I mentioned this later on, but I'll go ahead and bring it up now. So if you put in a short answer type of question and you say, I want to collect only email addresses in there, they will make sure that whatever text is entered into that field contains a valid email address. It has to include an @ something dot something. So it's not just going to be somebody typing their name accidentally in the email field. They'll get an error and they'll have to go back and be required to put that in. So, but you can't do that with a long answer. So you have to make sure you pick the correct field to ensure you can actually collect the right kind of data. Are you doing a scale? Do you want to know somebody's, perception of what they thought of something? If so, you're probably going to do a linear scale kind of question versus a, multiple choice where it might be, did you like this, yes or no? Maybe you want to get more of a range. One note on ranges, I don't like to give people a middle choice. I sort of force them to one side or the other. So if I'm doing a scale of, I'll go 1 through 10 maybe, because that doesn't really give them a middle option. They go, well, actually 5. I would go 1 through 6, excuse me. So 1 through 6 would force them. If they take 3 or 4, it's on one side or the other. If you do 1 through 7, you do have a middle choice. So try to think about that. If you want to force them to make an opinion or to have an opinion, you can force them to have an opinion. Or if you want to give them an option to be neutral, you can give them the option to be neutral. I don't like to give people options to be neutral most of the time, because most people really are neutral. They generally do lean one way or the other. They just might not want to tell you at that point. So again, question types are dependent on the data that you're actually getting. When you require things, it does really deter people from finishing that form. So when you're thinking about what to require, if you don't need to make everything required, don't make everything required. Some things can be optional. It's completely okay. And you can set those questions within the forms to be optional or required. And I don't think you're really, you know, you're really not doing yourself any favors by making them all required if you don't need them all to be required. Because some people might want to skip questions. Sometimes it's just not applicable, or they don't feel comfortable answering specific questions. And you'd rather them get something. You'd rather them fill out the survey to a certain degree in most cases than just completely ignore it because everything's required and they don't want to do that one question that you accidentally made required, right? So be cautious about that. It's something to consider. I talked about data validation. There's also this thing called hint text. So underneath the question, you could kind of have a little bit of an example, or you can, you know, identify exactly how you want them to answer it. I know instructors that use the forms for collecting questions, answers to questions. Actually, Bob Caban does it a lot with his classes. He'll actually use a Google form to have students fill out short answer questions. So he might say, you know, here's the question that I want you to answer, and then in the hint text, he might, you know, give them a few little tidbits about how he might want them to respond, or, you know, use complete sentences or whatever he needs to say to really indicate exactly how they should put the information in there. So that can be helpful too. And the sections, that's what you're going to use to create multi-part forms. You're going to add new sections, and then when you do a multiple choice question, you can say based on a certain answer, they go to a certain section. So that's a really useful tool if you're trying to guide people through and you don't want them to, you know, have to go through and skip questions they don't even need to see. You can skip them for them. You can kind of move them along to the next part of the survey. And then I like to tell you to just make it pretty, because it does make a difference. I know it seems crazy, but, you know, things, the way they look really does make a big difference on how people react to it. Their initial reaction, you know, they say, you know, first impressions are everything, right? That's, people have a first impression of what you send them. When you go to a website and it looks like it was built in 1995 and, you know, everything is blocky and, you know, just, you know, two colors and really ugly, and you can't navigate through anything, and it doesn't work on your phone, you're not going to buy anything from there if they're selling stuff, right? You're definitely not putting your credit card into that website. So, you know, think about it in the same way. You're asking for people's, a lot of time, their personal information. So, you know, don't make it look terrible. Go to a little bit of effort and try to at least dress it up a little bit. And Google Forms does make that pretty easy. You know, they do have these themes, templates. You can choose different colors. You can actually add pictures and videos into the survey itself. So, you know, take a little bit of time. You don't need to do a whole lot because these things are in themselves pretty decent looking already. But, you know, think about that when you're going through it. Yeah. Cool. So let's talk about add-ons a little bit. Any idea what these are? Anybody have any experience with these add-ons? Okay. They are kind of what you think they are. Google does this thing with a lot of their tools where they put it out there and they kind of make it to a certain degree open source, and they give you some access to source code. Not, you guys probably aren't looking at it, but developers will see it. And so when people have access to certain parts of their code, they can create additional tools. And they get created in kind of this open source environment, and people make them to work with Google tools in ways that the Google tools weren't originally designed to do that. So rather than Google spend all the time and money developing these things, this is kind of their way of saving a little money and making it sort of a collaborative effort. Other people make them for them, and they do it. And sometimes these add-ons actually are done so well that Google adopts them, you know, into their official store. And that's happened with one in particular that I like called Notifications. This particular add-on will notify you every time somebody fills out your survey, so it'll send you an email. You can actually set it, I think, for like a once-a-day update or an every time the form is submitted update, so you have some choices there. But that's a great add-on for forms, especially if it's a time-sensitive thing and you're taking these up until the last minute. You need to send somebody in a final count or something like that, you would know exactly when somebody sent you a submission to your form. Yeah, so there's others out there. That's a great example of one. The other one was the one I was discussing earlier called the Choice Eliminator add-on, where it allows you to use Google Forms kind of like a scheduling tool where every time somebody selects an option on a multiple choice question, that option goes away. So that's a really neat thing too. But there are plenty of other add-ons, and you can find them when you go to your settings. I'll pull up a live form later and we can take a look at this, but in your settings, you start here and it'll open up an add-on store, and then once you've got add-ons added to your Google Forms, you can manage them here in any of the forms you create. So you don't have to add them for every form, you add them to your Forms account, and then as you create new forms, you can manage those add-ons accordingly. The other thing you want to think about, once you've got your form built, is you need to share it, right? You need to send it to people, and there's several ways you can do this. It's not just one approach, which again I kind of like, because everybody has their own needs and you want to be able to do things your own way. Always take a look at it first. I know that kind of goes without saying, but I've got to say it. Don't send out your form without testing it. I always like to send it to somebody else, maybe in my office even, to have them go through it and check it and see if there's any spelling errors or whatever, make sure the form flows the way it needs to, especially if you've got those multi-part questions, because those are kind of easy to confuse yourself with and send people to the wrong section. You want to make sure everything's going the right way. Okay. You're going to always adjust your settings before you send it, and I'll show you what all these settings are, but they're things like how many times can somebody submit a form response? Do you want it to be anonymous, or do you want people to sign it, and things like that. So you want to adjust those before you send out your form. Also your add-ons, do you want to be notified? It's always kind of bad when you send it out and you realize you didn't turn your notification add-on, and you've been waiting for responses and you haven't gotten any responses in a week. Oh man, I forgot to turn that add-on on and now I don't know, but I've gotten 10 responses. So set that all up. Like I said, anonymous, not anonymous. Do you want people to be able to submit multiple responses? That's another one you can adjust for. You do have to sign in for that, because if you're anonymous, they've got no way of knowing, but you can say, all right, I just want one response per person. Now when you send it, just like when you share Google Docs or Google Sheets or anything else from Google, there's a little tool where you can send it directly from the Forms area, and you can just enter people's email addresses and go from there. You can also just grab that link and write your own email. So if you've got a mail, a group set up in your Gmail, and you just want to send it directly to that group, or you want to send it to the faculty list or the staff list, then you don't really want to do that through their Forms send tool. You just open up your own email, copy the link, and add it to your email. Also, social media, don't forget about that. These forms share really well on social media, so if you're just trying to get as many responses as you can, then that's a great way to do it. Just put it out there on your channels. When you go to analyze the data, there's some things you want to ask yourself. Do you want to continue accepting these responses after a certain date, or do you want to stop? There's a way to just turn off responses so that anybody who's got that link would no longer be able to actually use it. So that's a good thing to know. And if you do have a cutoff date, for example, again, it's a contest maybe, you need to make sure on that date you go in there and turn off your responses. Now there may be an add-on, I haven't checked for this, but there could be an add-on that would allow you to stop it after a certain date. I wouldn't be surprised if there was. But at the very least, there's a button. You just manually turn it off. It's pretty straightforward, on, off. There is a way to look at summary of all your responses versus kind of the individual responses. So you can associate, the first response on the first question with the first response on, and you kind of know it's the same person. So that way, I'll show you on one of these forms here in a bit, but basically you get summaries, everybody's responses kind of all put together. 5 people answered A to question 1, 5 people answered B to question 2, and whatever, so on and so forth. If you go look at the individual responses, even if it's anonymous, you're going to be able to identify, which answers to which questions are associated with the same person. So it's still anonymous, but at least you know that the answers are kind of together. You can view these in Google Sheets, like I was saying before. You can add them to an existing sheet. You can import a spreadsheet into your Google Sheets and have them go directly into that spreadsheet. So if you've got a template you need to collect them in, again, you can kind of work it right into that if you need to. But by default, it's just going to, collect them right into Forms, and then if you want to import those into a sheet, you just click a button and it takes all your data right into a sheet, which you can download. into a CSV, which works with Excel or anything else. Download the CSV. So let's look at a couple of forms that I've used before. So this is the back end, I guess, of my faculty development questionnaire. You see at the top here, I put an image. I just used a basic color, so kind of the general lay of the land here is at the top. You've got a little bit of a description. And then when you want to add more stuff, you just go to the right and you can decide what you want to add. Do you want to add a section, a video, an image like I have here, another title, or a question? So a question shows up, and then you've got your options for question types. And when you select a particular question type, your options for that particular question type are going to be down here. So do I want to add some hint text? Do I want to also ask for the time? Okay. Linear scales. I can change the number of options on my linear scales. I can create labels for them. So you've got plenty of choices here. When you want to require it, you can just select require it. I think the interface is really simple. It's part of the reason I like this so much is because almost anybody can come in here and figure out how to use this. Copy, trash, all that sort of stuff. Now, also you're working with kind of a drag and drop interface here, so if you want to move these questions around, you just kind of drag the handle and move them up and down. Maybe you put things in the wrong order initially. I will say, once you start collecting responses, you don't really want to edit these. So it's never a good idea to adjust the questions you're asking after you've already started collecting data. But I mean, you can see sort of the scales can be anything. Have fun with it sometimes. I don't know what Sakai is the minimum versus I'm an expert. That's my scale. I don't necessarily need to use 1 through 10. I just kind of want to know what do they think about their perception of how they use Sakai. So anyway, once you get all these set up, you've added a picture. Maybe you want to change the theme. You've got options for colors, so it's pretty easy to just change a color. And then if you want to use an image, you can upload your own photo, or you can choose the different themes here. So you've got all kinds of fun choices. It's springtime, you can make it pretty and green, right? There we go. And it makes it look great. Yeah, it changes some of the colors and stuff. And if you want to see what this looks like for the actual user of the form, there's a preview option. So preview your form. That's what it looks like without all the options for editing and whatnot. So pretty straightforward here. The responses, oh, this is our add-on option, by the way. So now that I've got add-ons, you can see that if I want to use my notifications, I can notify me how many times do I want to be notified every day. You know, depends on how many responses we get, so that's the option for it. I thought it was going to be per day, but it'll actually choose how many responses, you know, need to be submitted before you're notified. So if you want to know after every response, you set this to 1. Every 1 response, I get an email. Yeah. You're laughing because that would be a little bit much for you, but yeah. I mean, for me, sometimes it's good for me to know after every response if I'm not serving a large group. Settings here, these are the ones I was talking about that you want to adjust before you send it. So who can respond, anyone, or just anyone in brevard.edu. This requires login though. They only submit 1 response. So I was wrong when I said it didn't. It does require login if you're going to ask them to only submit 1 response.
So how come, is it because you're using the Brevard system that it gives you that option for anyone in Brevard to use?
Yeah, yeah.
If you're doing it from your own Gmail account.
Yeah, it would not give you that option to limit it because we work in this kind of specific domain. So because we're a Google Apps for Education account, it knows that we might want to only limit things to our students or staff or faculty. So it does allow us to do that.
Well, but when you require the login, does it necessarily then associate the email with the responses?
Yes, it does. When you go to look at your data, you'll have an email next to every single response, so you'll know which email submitted which response. The confirmation page you can also adjust, so if you want to provide some additional details, aside from just thank you, you can say something else on that page if you need to. Um, Again, if you're only submitting one response, they can't submit another. If you want them to submit another, they can. Whether or not your users see the responses is also an option. So if it's a poll, you might want to let them see the responses afterwards. That might be kind of fun for them. And then you could put something in the instructions that say, you will see the results when you complete the poll. Right. Okay. And so again, these are your settings here. If you need to make a copy, or use your add-ons here. The Help Center is great too. Google's Help Center, is going to be the most up-to-date because they do update these pretty frequently. Like, I've said in the last year, they've made some pretty significant changes. So if something new pops up and you're not sure what it is, that's going to be the best place to go because it's always, before they put it out, they're going to update it. Let's look at these responses though, because this is kind of cool. So here's the automatic graphs it generates. Do you use LAMP? Yes, no, how comfortable. Okay. So these are the summary responses, the individual responses. So this is one response. There's another response. There's another response. They break it up by page. I think this has even changed since I last saw it. It used to all be on the same page. So here you go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can scroll through each one of them. Whichever way here. I told you that you can turn them off. There's your accepting responses option, so it tells you pretty clearly, it's in red, you know when you're not accepting responses. And if you are, you are. When you want to go into Sheets, you go right here into Sheets. Got options here if you want to download or print. So these are the ones they make for you that are automatic and they're easy, but Excel gives you more options for graphing. So in your sheet, you see here, they're always going to be time-stamped, which is nice, so you know when people submitted these forms. And then, just pretty much like anything else. And there's everything. Okay, my faculty development, there's the other one. So this is the one that I send out after these kinds of workshops. Here's all my questions. I'm using a linear scale. 1 to 6, waste of time, very helpful. Did I communicate well? This is the only one I've got that's required. Okay. Let's preview. Or no, I required others. I just wasn't clicking on them. So, again, it's pretty simple. You don't want to ask more than you need. When you get your responses, they're here. And I can come find them and figure out what I need to work on next time. So, again, I don't want to make it feel like it's more complicated than it is because they're just not that complicated. You really want to do most of your thinking before you build it. Then once you're building it, it's pretty straightforward, and the options are all pretty clear. That's really one of the things that I like about it. Now, it doesn't have some of these more advanced functions that you're talking about with, regards to knowing what people have done, even with an anonymous survey. So there's some limitations, but free and easy is usually pretty good for me, and because it does almost all the things that we're really ever going to need it to do, I think it's going to be a good solution for most of you, and really, when you consider the cost of something like SurveyMonkey for a year, is it really worth the cost to have that one additional thing? I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But do you guys have any questions for me? I don't want to take up too much more of your time, and we're kind of at the end here.
Access this through Drive,
Yeah.
and anything that we create and collect is based upon our credentials, so it is password protected.
Oh yeah, nobody else can get to this unless you add a collaborator. Now you can add collaborators. You can, like I did with your form, I made it, and then now somebody else is the owner. I think it's Jennifer is the owner now. And if she wants to remove me from the form completely, she can. She can take me off, and I would no longer be able to edit or see responses. So, yeah, the users will never have access to your responses unless they somehow logged into your account. And when you're in Drive here, I mean, you've got a new option, and there you go, new form. It's also down here if you go to the more, or you just go directly to googleforms.google.com.